Welcome to Reaction. I'm Maggie Pagano, Executive Editor, and I'm joined today by Tim Montgomerie, one of our distinguished political commentator and who's recently joined the Reaction team. This is part of a new series called Rapid Reaction, where we respond very rapidly to instant events. And we have seen a very quick turnaround the last 24 hours, haven't we, Tim? On Friday, Hancock apologized. The Prime Minister said the matter is closed. 24 hours later, he has resigned. What do you think happened in that period?
Well, I think, Maggie, we were in touch on Friday, and you were typical of nearly everyone I spoke to that day, whether it was, people in the corner shop, whether it was my family, whether it was Conservative MPs. I don't think I really spoke to anyone who didn't think that this would lead inevitably, necessarily, to Matt Hancock leaving his position. This isn't about the sadness of the marital affair. It's about the fact that government has been regulating our private lives for the last 18 months because of the pandemic. Young people haven't been able to form relationships. People haven't been able to mourn their lost ones at funerals. And you can't have the health secretary co-architect of these regulations not abiding by them. Tory MPs didn't go public and call for Matt Hancock to go, but their silence was ominous, I think. There was no one really on social media backing him, and it was inevitable. The big question and concern I have is Matt Hancock may not have seen it, and it's sometimes hard to judge your own conduct, but why didn't Boris Johnson and his advisors? There's an indulgence, I think, inside number 10 Downing Street of ministerial behaviour that needs to be addressed. Matt Hancock fell on his sword, but I still think there are questions about Boris Johnson's judgment in these matters.
Why it's often said about Boris that he likes to be liked, and he doesn't like to upset people. Do you think it's that, or do you think it's the moral question that he believes the private lives of politicians are private? But clearly this, as you just pointed out, transcended that, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, look, beyond.
It's no great news story to say that Boris's private life is colourful, and he may feel that any act by him that looks judgmental towards his colleagues will somehow rebound on him, that makes him look like he doesn't give people the benefit of the doubt when he's often had that given to him by the public or other people. But he does need to get over that. This really isn't about private lives. It's about one of the most important aspects of government policy. The rules in a pandemic really matter. They're essential to public confidence in the COVID strategy. And general lapses of, in some of the way other ministers have behaved, the Conservative Party is vulnerable to getting the reputation that we will remember from the 1990s, Maggie, of sleaze. And it hasn't affected the opinion polls yet, but suddenly there'll be a trigger in the public mind. There'll be a tipping point. And I think more action needs to be taken to get ahead of that. Absolutely.
What do you think, Tim, about the security aspect of this? I mean, clearly the camera, as far as we understand, was hidden. Matt Hancock didn't know about it. Do you think every minister and civil servant in Whitehall now is sweeping their offices? I mean, it's something quite East European about this, isn't it? And quite scary. Do you think there was
in many ways, I think it is, Maggie, you're right to raise it. It's one of the most important aspects of all of this. Fortunately, on this occasion, it was a tabloid newspaper or a whistleblower to a tabloid newspaper spying on the Secretary of State for Health. But are you confident, Maggie, that our security services are on top of ensuring that this isn't happening in the Ministry of Defence or the Foreign Office by, potentially someone and some organisation or some country that's much more sinister? So there will definitely be intelligence people in Whitehall who will be worrying a lot about this, or at least I hope there'll be intelligence people worrying a lot about this.
I certainly absolutely hope so. And I believe that the equipment was supplied by a Chinese distributor manufacturer, whom is banned in the US on security grounds. So I think absolutely there need to be some very, very big questions asked. Now, Tim, from your point of view, one of your oldest and closest friends, Sajid Javid, is now in the hot seat. He's been brought back from the cold and given a job that perhaps is probably more important than that of Prime Minister right now. How do you think he feels about it?
Well, yes, I need to confess, as you've rightly said, Maggie, Sajid was one of my first friends at university. We've known each other for, this is when I begin to feel old, for 3 decades. And so I suppose I can offer an informed insight about him, but I am a big admirer of him. So I'm afraid you might get a slightly Panglossian view, but I'll try and be as honest and credible as I can. The first thing I think is worth saying is he resigned from one of the biggest, best jobs in government last year. It was probably the job of his dreams in many respects, but he said to the Prime Minister that Dominic Cummings was undermining his position. People, at least around Dominic Cummings, were briefing against him in the press. And he said to him, look, I'm going to go because I'm not going to put up with it, but you shouldn't be accepting this in your own government. He was the first person at a senior level in the Conservative Party to warn about the influence of Dominic Cummings. And I think what Boris Johnson is gaining in having Sajid Javid back is someone of integrity, someone who called it as it was and still calls it as it is. And that really matters. And good on, just criticize Boris Johnson for not taking a tough enough position on Matt Hancock, but at least he hasn't frozen, Sajid as a critic out. He's brought him back in. And I think one of the things that will happen, of course, he's coming in as health secretary, but because of what he did last year, because of his return to government, because of that principle of residence, I think he'll have significant authority in cabinet. So a big beast is back in the cabinet as well.
Yeah. How do you think he will tackle it? Have you spoken to him? Is he nervous of it?
Well, he's a very methodical person, and he will definitely be. One thing he's not afraid of is to admit that he doesn't understand something. When he hasn't got an insight or experience of an issue, unlike some politicians that both of us are probably familiar with, who'll try and hide that and pretend that they're in charge, he will go out and ask people. He'll get experts in. And I don't expect that he will rush to do or say anything. He will take his time to get on top of this brief. And my goodness, it's a massive brief. Even if the COVID pandemic was defeated by tomorrow, there is the biggest backlog of NHS treatments of the post-war period. We have to introduce the new vaccine service to the NHS because COVID's not going away. Vaccines are going to be a regular part of our lives. The NHS staff is exhausted. It's depleted. There's funding challenges. So it's a massive job. And in some ways, I think you made this point to me the other day when we were talking generally about the role of health secretary. You could argue that it's a bigger job than the one he held in number 11 Downing Street. But not
I would argue
traditional great officers of state, but huge at the moment.
No, absolutely. But, I do still stand by that, Tim, in a sense. Chancellors can only pull a few very quite basic levers, whereas the health secretary is responsible for the national health of the country. And now we haven't mentioned social care, which is going to be a huge issue coming up. No, it's going to be a tremendous opportunity. And I often think that one needs to rename the National Health Service as the National Wellbeing Service, actually try and turn it on its head and help. This has shown, hasn't it, so much more help with people's weight, general illnesses that have made people more vulnerable to COVID. Yeah. So let's go back to Boris. He's been very brave, as you say, not very brave, but he's taken a positive move in bringing back a big beast who did criticize him. Do you think that it ushers the way forward for a bigger reshuffle? Do you think he'll be braver to bring other people like Sajid back into the cabinet?
I hope so. I hope so. A little piece I wrote for Reaction on Saturday ahead of the decision to appoint Sajid Javid was asking this very question. Would Boris Johnson do a pretty simple reshuffle without affecting other ministerial roles? And that's what he's done, because Sajid Javid coming from outside the cabinet, he's not had to do a big rejigging of his team. But I think he really needs to. And this is a piece that I'm currently working on for Reaction that will be up in the next 24 hours. And just to sort of tease what's in that piece, my biggest recommendation is that Boris appoints an effective deputy prime minister. I disagree with many things that Dominic Cummings has said recently, but his observation about how Dominic Raab, the foreign secretary, was a much better chair of cabinet meetings and cabinet subcommittees when Boris was ill resonated with me. Boris doesn't get into the detail enough. He was mayor of London, and so hasn't, although he's briefly foreign secretary, he hasn't been around, Whitehall very much. And so someone else, I think, needs to be appointed at a senior level to do many of the prime ministerial roles that aren't Boris Johnson's gift. He's gifted in many ways, but we're not seeing the kind of Thatcher-esque scrutiny of ministers that was true, certainly in those 1980s. Ministers used to be frightened, or at least very prepared when they went into meetings with Maggie. I get the impression that people, well, not get the impression, I'm told, people worry about meetings with Michael Gove. They know he'll ask tough questions, but I don't really know anyone who worries about a meeting with the Prime Minister. They just don't think they'll be asked the tough questions. And that's not good for policy formulation.
That's not good. That's not good for accountability, any of those issues. So who would you like to see? Are you going to sort of tease, give us a few maybe little clues? Well, who would you like to see as deputy? Should it be Dominic Raab? And what other big posts do you think should be changed?
Well, it's a bit late now. Sajid would have been my ideal choice for that role. It might be someone like Gove. It could be Raab. That is a good suggestion. It just needs to be someone with real experience and someone who isn't a rival, I think, to the Prime Minister, because you don't want to set up a position whereby Boris starts worrying that his deputy prime minister is using that role as a springboard to undermine him. So that might be why Gove might not be a good person for that job. It's a tricky job, but I think it's an essential one. I probably should not say more about the article, partly because I'm exhausted after a weekend of doing too much media, and I may not be making so much sense in this video as I hope normally, but also people should wait to see the article, I think.
Absolutely. They should wait, and you'll have some fabulous ideas. Thank you, Tim. And I hope you catch up with some sleep.
Thank you.
After all your fantastic thoughts. So if you like this video, it'd be great if you liked or subscribed on YouTube, but also maybe you'd be tempted to come to our news site, www.reaction.life, where you'll find Tim's brilliant article, probably tomorrow morning, and all the writings from our great team. Thank you.